With us today, helping out is myself from FireSafe Sonoma. My name is Roberta McIntyre. I'm President and CEO of FireSafe Sonoma. FireSafe Sonoma is the countywide fire safe council. Then we've been working in the wildland fire safety and risk reduction space for 26 years now. We are a private nonprofit and sustained through grants and donations. Also with us today is well, actually, FireSafe Sonoma, we are in partnership with what we call the Resilient Landscape Coalition, which was founded in around 2019. And several folks got together and we wanted to provide more information to people about defensible space, because the fire folks were always basically just telling people, cut this, pull it out, trim this, take it out, get rid of this. And that's what I used to do. I used to be the county fire marshal. And
Roberta, can I ask,
Yeah.
we need to do the Spanish translation option, so our
yes, let's do that
translators
right
don't have
away.
to catch up with everything you said, so sorry.
Yeah. Let me introduce
Thanks,
first
Mimi.
our Spanish helpers. We have Julie Burns and Ricardo Perez Delgado helping out with Spanish. And we are doing this bilingually. So if you're a Spanish speaker, you will have the globe on the bottom to switch language. And if you don't see the globe on your bottom ribbon, you can click the 3 dots and you should find it there.
Thank you, Roberta. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos al seminario web. Esta reunión será interpretada simultáneamente al español. Si quiere escuchar el contenido en español, por favor haga clic en el icono de los 3 puntitos o el icono del globo y ahí puede seleccionar su idioma español. Si quiere hacer una pregunta en la caja de preguntas, esta será interpretada al inglés para los ponentes. Muchas gracias. Back to you, Roberta.
Okay, thank you. And then for Q&A, what we'll do is ask y'all to put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. And that's where we will go find the questions. And towards the end of the presentation, we'll field all the questions in a Q&A period. Eric, can I have the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, here's the one I was looking for. So yeah, I already explained about FireSafe Sonoma. And then around 2019, again, FireSafe Sonoma got together with several other collaborators to try to find a way to show people how to do their landscaping without ripping everything out and making it look like a moonscape. So we partnered, these 4 entities got together: FireSafe Sonoma, the Habitat Corridor Project with April Owens and Jennifer Roberts, as well as the Sonoma Ecology Center. The original champions, some of them are gone now, but currently with Sonoma Ecology Center helping out in this endeavor is Eric Schoohs, Caitlin Cornwell, Ellie Inslee, and Rochelle Bean. And then also we have, as part of the collaborative, the UC Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County. And working through that entity, we have Mimi Enright and Jennifer Roberts helping out. And so all of those folks are all here for the most part. Many of them are here today helping out with the presentation, and they're going to share their expertise in plants. They'll talk the plant language and move this forward, and you guys are all going to learn a lot. And all I'm going to do is go dark here in a minute and learn a lot as well, and hand it off to Eric. And then, because I know not as much about plants as these folks do, I'll handle the Q&A. I'll be tossing questions when we get to the Q&A to these wonderful experts in the area of plants and resilient landscape. So Eric, you have it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roberta. And with that being said, I want to give a big shout out to Roberta, offering our with her fire background, offering us that expertise. We're very proud of being all the information that we offer is kind of vetted by local fire folks. So as you can see down on the bottom there as well, in partnerships with CAL FIRE, different local fire departments. And we love that. Okay, so before we dive into the content, I just want to offer up a couple different resources. We've got our Resilient Landscapes Coalition website. It's in English and Spanish. You can see the homepage here. You can learn about the house and home hardening, the hardscaping and landscaping, different plants you might choose that are fire-wise, water-wise, and resilient to the California ecosystem and climate. And the surrounding wildlands, which is the other aspect we're going to talk about today. Tending the land, this is a new resource, and the whole concept is you work obviously out to 100 feet in the defensible space zone, but what do you do once you're outside of that? How can you create resilient landscapes that are water-wise, fire-wise, and offer a lot of biodiversity and different ecosystem services? Some of those might be buzzwords, but we'll unveil those as we go and give definitions. So check them both out. Wonderful resources. They're all free and available to everyone, as well in Spanish. So I like to take a second just to point out Sonoma County, where we are. You can't quite see the lines too well on here of the exact county, but I think it's really important to just take a moment and point out the original stewards of the land who are still here to this day doing the good work. They have a lot to offer for information. And speaking to the Tending the Land website, we have a couple of great stories from local practitioners representing different tribes and tribal groups. So here in Sonoma, we have the Pomo, the Wapo, and just the north side of the Miwoks historical territory. But two of those people are Clint McKay, who's the Indigenous Education Coordinator at Pepperwood Preserve. You might have heard of Pepperwood and/or Clint. Fantastic resource, some good stories on the website. And then Greg Saris, who is an author. He's kind of a do-it-all, but an author, an educator, and currently the tribal chairman for the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. So I think it's important to just take, anytime we're out on the land, a few moments to appreciate how the land got to its beautiful state. It wasn't just a thing that happened by happenstance. It wasn't untended. It was cared for deeply and lived with. So, okay, agenda for today. Fire context, we're going to be talking about fire in California. We'll dive into defensible space, and then we'll move beyond. And then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. Really, the point of this is that we want people to have a chance to engage. We want all of you to be asking questions and putting them into the Q&A and/or chat. And by the end, then we'll be able to delve into some of those. It might be specific questions about one that comes up a lot is dead standing trees, or it might be, how do I know what healthy looks like? And I'm happy to get into the nitty-gritty with that. That's what we're here for, is that kind of one-on-one information and chat. So with that, what are a couple questions? What are you thinking about? What plants are you unsure if you want to keep or get rid of? Are you focused on fire? Are you focused on biodiversity? Yeah, a little check-in with yourselves would be very helpful, and share out what you're thinking, please. Okay, Sonoma County. I suspect not everyone in this group maybe lives here, but maybe you live close. But one of the wonderful things about a fire adapted community and ecosystem is just how beautiful it is. On the left here, we have an oak savanna, like a nice big oak tree that's fully leafed out. We've got coastal chaparral on the top right. And then on the bottom, we have our coastal redwoods. So we have a very diverse landscape. And that's a big aspect of what creates beauty. It also creates opportunities for different species. That's why we have so many birds. It's a hyper biodiverse place, and a big reason why many of us live here. Right. One other thing I want to point out, in line with the last slide or a couple slides back, it's beautiful because it was tended by Indigenous folks for time immemorial, for millennia. And so taking the acknowledgement of fire being a classic tool that was used, and also understanding that in order to get back to a place where we're not worried about catastrophic wildfire, takes us figuring out how to live with fire. And part of that is growing our knowledge of living on this land. And so we'll talk a bit about that throughout the presentation. That ties into where we live. So over the past, century really, but over the past 70 years especially, we've seen a huge shift from people living in urban centers moving out towards the wildlands. Who doesn't want to live in, out on a beautiful place in the hills with 10 acres and, have kind of their own space. And so we're trying to navigate this continuum here. You see what we would call the WUI, the wilderness urban interface, is shifting where fires used to happen in places that people didn't really live as much, what we consider, or what we term wildlands. Now that's where people live. Fires are happening there. People are at risk, and we're trying to figure out how to navigate that so that we're not putting people and their lives at risk throughout this time. There's another aspect of that. More so than ever, fires in California are not caused by natural occurrences. A lightning strike happens on occasion, pretty rare though. And then on the flip side, you have drag chains on the ground, you have equipment out that gets a little too hot and touches the grass next to it. You have someone throw out a cigarette butt. So it's really important for us to navigate stewarding this land with the understanding that humans are the ones that are in this space now, and they're also starting the fire. So we can kind of put responsibility on ourselves to be good actors in every way possible. Here's a snapshot of what used to be with wildfire. So you can see in here these little polygons. Each of those is a historic fire starting in 1935 and moving up to 2014. Most of them are under 10,000 acres. Kind of 2,000 to 10,000 is what we're seeing mostly here. And they're spread all over the place over years. The different colors kind of show the time that they were at. And if you want to check it out, I highly recommend going to firemap.sdsc.edu. That should be in the chat, and kind of look at the history of it all. It's quite interesting. On the flip side, now as of 2015, and I think we all know 2017 was a big year here in Sonoma, fires have gotten bigger, and not by just a little bit, by a massive amount. Before, they used to be low intensity, they burned themselves out. Now we're at a point where we have professionals doing everything they can to save people's lives and stop the fires, which is a very big shift. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that change has happened. Back to the wild and urban interface. Here's just a shot of what we're saying. So in 1964, where people lived during the Hanley fire, not many of them lived in the footprint. There's a little bit of low density housing development you can see over on the left, but really no high density housing development. Whereas you shift to the right, the 2017 Tubbs fire, we're seeing a big shift. We're seeing people moving out, even high density housing under the fire footprint, and then a lot of low density housing. So this is where people are at, and this is why it's so important to talk about this. How do you manage that land? First things first, when we're talking about fire though, yes, it's great to do vegetation management. It offers so many benefits. However, when we're talking about protecting human life and property and the basics, it really starts at the home, making sure it's hardened, making sure you're keeping your zone 0 free of anything flammable, and following a lot of the rules that are here to save lives, property, the things that we value.
Eric, you're muted.
Yeah, I think maybe I was going a bit too fast for the translation. Okay, so as you can read here, harden the building. Most fires are caused by embers, up to 90%. There's still a lot of studies being done there, but if we have harder homes, then you're going to be less likely for anything bad to happen along the way. And then we move into defensible space and beyond. One second now, there it goes. Okay, I just want to point out, California understands that fire is a part of its history and a part of the land. And so you can see here, since 1965, we've had to take care of our defensible space. In 2005 and 2008, there were some big shifts. And then in 2020, they created the Zone 0, which I was just speaking to, where you want no flammable materials. That's huge to have an interest, especially on the governmental side, to make these shifts. And after it's put into law and regulation, it lands on the homeowners, hopefully with assistance, and also the stewards and other people living in the community to care for that space and make sure that we're following suit, because this is all scientifically backed. So what do some of the homes look like? I think we've probably all seen both of these. You can have the left where, I don't want to deal with this. It's a lot easier to clear it all out, maybe have a couple succulents. There's nothing to burn, so we're good. One problem with that, there's not a lot of opportunity for biodiversity, other ecosystem services that the land offers us. And that's a bummer, which we'll talk more about. And then on the right, the overgrown garden. We've all seen this too. Inaction turns into overgrown, a lot of times non-native plants that put us at fire risk. When plants are non-native, they tend to take over. So you have very little diversity oftentimes. And we really want to push the narrative of why native plants are important, how they support all the ecosystem services, and put us at, make us fire wise, put us at safety for fire. Give them a second to catch up. So ecology and sustainability in the defensible space. Again, we're just talking defensible space. We'll jump over to beyond right after this. But it's really important to point out that really for the first time ever, we need to make sure that our home spaces give opportunities to pollinators, birds, all kinds of insects, because there isn't as much wildland that's untouched, that's healthy, biodiverse, offering them places to live, places to eat, different foods to forage. So it's more important now than ever to make sure that we offer that in our gardens. And as you can see here, Douglas Tallamy says it better. For the first time in history, gardeners have become an important player in the management of our nation's wildlife. That book is linked in the chat. Wonderful read, and really touches on the topics that we're here discussing today. So looking out, this is a beautiful landscape. I think the first thing a lot of people might notice is there's wood chips on the ground, there's leaf litter, and excuse me, and it's actually native plants. So in front of you, you have coral bells or heuchera, wonderful native plant. It uses less water, offers food for pollinators, and it can fit underneath without causing fire risk, the oak tree behind it. So you have everything here. The leaf litter is offering habitat for insects and other decomposers. It holds water, especially as we get later into the deep of summer. And you can have beauty in native plants as well. I think people forget that at times. So I've talked a lot about ecosystem services. Just to give everyone a concept of what that is, it's things that the ecosystem offers us just by naturally acting healthy, basically operating in a way that is helpful to itself. So what does that look like? Fire resilience, which of course is important here, but there's other places as well. Shade, especially on a day like today, I can't tell you how nice getting under an oak tree is, and watching the rays come down through it and listen to the wind in it. You're supporting biodiversity. I'll talk in a second about how wonderful oak trees are, especially in this localized region. Water, we think a lot about not having water, especially late in summer, but how can we keep it on site? So Brock Dahlman over at Occidental Arts and Ecology Center has a great saying that it comes from other places, but I hear him habitually say it is slow it, spread it, sink it, store it. And so right now we've channelized a lot of water out to the oceans. It doesn't give it a chance to percolate through the ground. Having a healthy ecosystem is one way to keep that on site and follow with those 4 actions. Soil. We all want healthy soil. We want to grow beautiful things. We want to grow food. Definitely important. That ties into carbon. We'll talk a little bit more about all the carbon in the soil and in the plants. Everything that's living is made of hydrocarbons. It also, those organic materials are also what hold water in place as well. So can't really think about any of this without carbon. And of course, wildlife. We all love looking out, seeing a nice hummingbird, a beautiful local animal, some deer. None of that can happen without first caring for the land. An example, oak trees, especially our native oaks. You might see a coast live oak, a black oak, or a valley oak. All of them can be spectacular large trees, but specifically, I believe it's valley oaks here they're talking about, offer habitat to up to 700 species of insects. And a big one is caterpillars right here, whether they eat acorns or operate and live their lives on the trees, they're teeming with life. And the way you see that, all right, I've got a raised hand. I'm not sure if I can answer this or not, but we could try.
Eric, I think you should just keep going. If there's a
Okay.
raised hand, we can address questions in Q&A.
Okay, great. All right, so let me finish up to say, we've got all these insects, we've got things growing. Here's a black-capped chickadee. You've probably seen them. They tend to grow on, or they tend to live near the ground, so very close to us. They need 6,000 to 9,000 to raise one single brood of birds. They need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. And in order to get through with that, like we want to support oak trees that support the insects that ultimately support the chickadees. Mimi? Is that?
Sorry, it was just an error, which might be the problem for the other attendee who's got their raised hand as well.
Just wanted to make sure. Okay, great. So we love oak trees, and over here on the left, you can see it's beautiful underneath. There are coral bells, and there's a lot of spacing. This would be wildfire safe, fire-wise, and still be offering a lot of other services. A big thing, especially in defensible space, is oftentimes leaving diverse landscapes might mean risk, depending. We'll kind of dive into this, but making sure that you choose how much risk you're taking, where you're putting plants. Maybe you have a shrub in your defensible space that you really love. And so it's kind of navigating, okay, this isn't exactly the most fire safe or not the ideal plant here, but I really love it. What am I willing to risk? And there can be a lot of benefit to that. It all depends on where you're living and what the fire risk zones are as well. But something to always keep in the mind, and I'll try to call back to this as we talk through. And now we'll shift out to defensible space. I think it's important to point out all of this is about learning. So this might be the first step for you. This might be the 10th step for you. You might have been doing this for decades, but it's all about having an iterative process where we plan, we think we're going to do it one way, we go and we try it. Maybe it doesn't work, maybe it does. We go through that process and then we come back with a new plan after we learn. So it's all about adaptive stewardship, whether that's in defensible space or beyond. Again, I just want to reiterate ecosystem services, healthy landscapes give us all of these. It's the reason we're able to live. Keep those in mind as we move forward as well. One of the big losses that we're seeing is biodiversity. So that means the web of life is kind of unraveling itself. The more species that we have, if one is to get damaged, whether it's a certain tree species gets infected with a disease and then dies out, we have other options when you have biodiversity to fill in that niche and give us canopy or maybe some sort of food source for a bird or an insect. So biodiversity is great. We're seeing it diminish above ground and below. That means that we're going to have less resilient landscapes. This is a part of that. We see when we're losing disturbance on the land, we have less complexity oftentimes. We want a mosaic, a beautiful kind of mixture of what the land offers. So in many cases, when you have agriculture, you do see these monocultures, and that's okay. Our landscape, or I should say our economy is provided based on, wine here. So how can we navigate that and still support wildlife? In that case, the land surrounding are something that we can really do a good job of offering habitat and all the other aspects of ecosystem services. And then on the left too, you can see this land is stewarded to a certain degree. However, the spacing is all the same. You have basically one or two species down there. I see some lupin, maybe a couple of grasses. But if you're looking for habitat for a nice family of quails, say, they're going to struggle to exist in these spaces. So yes, we want that diversity of the landscape. I'll talk a little more about what that looks like. And so this is the main concept that we're talking to: disturbance versus resilience. Right now, we're in lands that have been undisturbed for a very long time, especially with fire suppression starting, around the center or the middle of the 18th century, 19th century. In the middle of the 19th century, the 1850s, fire suppression meant we didn't have different gaps opening in the canopy. We didn't have grasslands opening up and burning and taking the shrubs out. And we started to have this conversion from open areas that were great for grazers, great for different animals, on the edge of forests especially. Now those have disappeared. Grasslands are taken over by growth. And so we're kind of losing the resilience in that regard. And then when fires do come through, they do a lot of damage. There's too much fuel on the ground. There's too many things that'll burn. And so what we're trying to get ourselves back to is a trajectory that has just the right amount of disturbance, low intensity, burning slowly across the ground. All the species here in California are adapted to that. The trees can get a little singed and they're going to survive, and the grasses love it. So when we don't have a healthy ecosystem, we have this multiplicative effect of invasive species coming in. Oftentimes they form a huge monoculture. They thrive. Many of you probably know some of these species, especially one that I'll cover is broom. And so when we're thinking about keeping the land resilient, we have to also think about what does that stop us from, what does that stop from happening, which is invasive species coming in. So first on the list, you might have seen this, it's incredibly detrimental to grasslands. And so how do you manage it? What is it? Why is it bad? Go ahead, Mimi.
Sorry, it's some system error on my computer. I apologize. That's popping the hand up. I'm not intending to interrupt you, Eric. I really apologize.
No worries. So thistles, why are they bad? They take over grasslands, they form monocultures, and a big one for agriculture, especially here, is they're detrimental to livestock. So you might have seen many of these out there. What are we worried about? We're worried about them seeding more. A lot of these, especially yellow star thistle, can let out 10 to 30,000 seeds each time that it flowers. So the more that we manage it in advance, we bag the seed heads, we mow it early in the season before it goes to seed, and then we mow it again as it's about to go to seed so that none of them are viable. And otherwise we just hand pull it. And by doing that, we're allowing the native grasses to grow, right? They need fire. So if fire isn't coming through the land, these other things are invading, they're going to overtop any of the native species we have, not give them sunlight, steal their nutrients, and lead us into these degraded habitats. It really comes down to, as well, with thistles, especially, they will take over. However, if you get on top of it early, you don't let those seeds go out. You start from the outward, right? You start from small satellite populations that haven't fully established, and then you move towards the big mass that's happening in the middle of your grassland. You'll find pretty quickly that it responds to how you manage it or how you navigate stewarding land. Another one you've probably seen, but maybe don't think too much about or haven't heard many people talking about, is stinkwort. It's along every road. Right now it's flowering. You'll see the little yellow flowers. It's very sticky to the touch. If you try to pull it out, you'll feel like you were in sap or tar. The bad thing about it is it also, as any other invasive, forms monocultures. It's also detrimental to livestock as well. And so once you have your grasslands taken over, if you have some sort of animal that eats forbs and grasses, you're going to have less capacity to keep that animal fed and healthy. So how do you navigate this one? Hand pull it, put it in green waste, stay on top of it. And just want to point out, much like starting with the yellow star thistle before, start from the smaller populations and move inward. I just want to point out for this plant, and specifically, it just came here in 1984. The first ever incident of this plant existing in California that's noted was in 1984. And by 2012, so over a decade ago, 36 out of the 58 counties here had it. And it hasn't stopped, hasn't slowed down. And finally, one of the species that everyone asks about, I'd love to talk about, is actually 3 different species oftentimes. That's Scotch broom, Spanish broom, and French broom. So the one we see most often is French broom. The brooms actually got their names because back in the day, when they were around their Mediterranean habitat that they initially come from, people would just cut these and then go out and take it to sweep the ground, the floor, whatever. Unfortunately, there's way too many here for that to be a viable way of management, but we're doing our best in other ways. So why is it such an issue? They're dropping a lot of seeds. And once those seeds are dropped, they tend to exist for 40 up to 100 years. So, oh no, they're here. How do we go about it? It's not that they're going to last 100 years. It just means that after you get the seed bank to flush, after you get them to pop out, you got to make sure that you pull them and manage them before they seed again. With that in mind, a couple of successive flushes or a couple of times of disturbing the soil, pulling the plants, will diminish the numbers drastically. You'll go from maybe 100% cover of some area right down to 5 or less percent. It's just really important to know that after that first pull, you're going to see a lot of broom coming back. It's not impossible. It will respond. You just got to keep after it. Highly recommend doing this in the spring, early summer. The soil's still soft. It hasn't seeded yet. And you get a lot better results generally. The other thing you can do is take care of your trees. We want to keep large trees thriving. They offer a lot of benefits. They offer a lot of habitat, and they also can shade out species like broom oftentimes, or at least help keep them a little less healthy. So those are what you don't want. I wanted to jump back into what you do want. This is from the Pacific Northwest, so it's not quite local, but it does illustrate the different kind of pieces of the habitat that are really important. So they have this this nice little acronym, which is SLOPS, but you have snags, and you can see them over here. A snag is a partially living tree. Sometimes it can be dead, but it's offering habitat, the larger it is, to sometimes birds and bats, insects, all of the critters that need to make a home basically in a higher position. Legacy trees are just old trees. Everyone loves that big oak tree, those old redwoods, things that have been around for oftentimes hundreds of years. Openings, that means that you have, maybe you had a tree there before, it died. Death is a part of this whole ecosystem turnover. And in this case, an opening offers grasses a chance. It offers shrubs a chance that might be a food source for the birds living in the trees. So you have this patchwork, as I was talking about, this mosaic of, yes, something might have gone, but now there's a new opportunity there. Piles are as they sound. You can even create these yourself. Habitat piles are something that we highly recommend in tending the land. There's a great spot on the website to learn how to make them, what size they'll be, and then where to put them. That's a big aspect, right? If you're putting flammable material somewhere, you want to make sure you're not putting your favorite tree at risk, or, you know, forbid our houses or other parts of our property. And then you have shrubs, pretty self-explanatory. Logs, same thing. Trees that are dead on the ground, we also often call them nurse logs, and they offer a lot of food source for decomposers. Little critters will live in there, especially the mammals, voles, sometimes skunks. So each one of these habitat features offers something different. You want to have a full range of them on your property. And again, on the Tending the Land website, you can see different ways to implement these. Here's a few more examples in person. So you can see the shrub clumps. You can see the downed logs. This is kind of a classic in any redwood forest. Always going to see dead logs laying across. And oftentimes, I'm sure you expect, you'll see ferns growing out of them or some other sort of living material. And finally, here's a snag. Sometimes they're tall, sometimes they're short. The larger they are, the more value they can offer. This is in juxtaposition. You know, we're talking about removing to some degree vegetation if you have a lot of heavy fuels, and still leaving those biodiverse areas with those different habitat features. But what we don't want to do is go in and clear everything, because life finds a way. So when you're here out on the land and you see this, you know, we have these two pictures overlaid, but on the right side, you see a place that was totally cut out. Any living vegetation for the most part was removed. All that does is leave open an opportunity for something like what we see in the top left, broom, to move in and move in very rapidly and fill that space. And as we said with broom, once it's there, it's not going anywhere for a while. It's going to take a lot of effort. So we want to use vegetation. We want to use mulch. Bare soils tend to erode into waterways. That's detrimental for a lot of different reasons, but specifically salmonids, which people tend to love, I agree. They don't like turbid water. They don't like water with a lot of soil in it, and so it can damage them. Highly recommend, if you're going to remove plants, finding a way to keep that soil covered. Whether that's a planting plan, whether that's, okay, you're removing a bit of this invasive and you're giving it a chance for natives to move in, or it could be that you cover it with mulch. A mulch that's like an arbor mulch, has all the parts of the wood in it, is great for retaining water and moisture and suppressing weeds, while hopefully giving the natives a chance to grow. One example of just the right amount of clearing, but not over clearing, is here. This is a before at Saddle Mountain. This was given to us by Dr. Monica Del Martini. So here you see some Douglas fir, which is a native. However, because fire hasn't been here to check it, it kind of takes over and it pierces through the oak canopies and eventually becomes taller than them and shades them out and kills our beautiful oak woodlands. So by removing this and leaving different things on the ground, as you'll see here, you can rehabilitate. You can offer a lot of different habitat features and benefits, and also have a wonderful place that everyone wants to be. You see here on the bottom right is a pile. Over on the left, there's a stump or just a small snag. And none of these trees look straight, uniform, and tall like the photo before when we were talking about disturbance and resilience. So this is a nice oak woodland that's offering plenty of habitat while still being fire resilient. If a fire were to burn up to the tree on the grass, that's okay. These trunks, I don't know if anyone's ever had a fire of their own, but these trunks are 12 inches plus. If you try to throw a big log in the fire and it's not hot enough, it's not going to burn. Okay. Let me see how we're doing, getting a little tight on time. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly so we can do the Q&A, but carbon is important. It's a part of the soil. We can send out these slides later, but carbon, we're always talking about pulling it out of the atmosphere. It's heating up the earth. A big way to do that is to have healthy soil, keep soil on site, and to have grasses and other species that are healthy on top, holding the soil as well. And I just want to point out that many people think of trees as kind of offering all these ecosystem services, and they do. However, what's above ground is only a portion of what's below ground. And trees are just a portion of those services that are being offered. Yes, the Amazon might be the lungs of the world, but that's not just the trees in it. It's the shrubs, it's all the different materials that are living there. And this is also just a great point. Wetlands, underground wetlands are holding a ton of carbon. So if we can support the retention of our wetlands, we're going to have healthier landscape. Speaking of our favorite little friends, birds, dark-eyed juncos, chickadees, a lot of times are ground nesters. So when you're going out to do the work, vegetation management, February through August especially is when you shouldn't be doing it. That's when the birds are mating, they're getting ready to nest, they're nesting, they're fledgling. So if you can, do it during the winter's period. Do it from fall, around this time is a good time to start, although you want to be careful. Sometimes we're working with power equipment and there's a fire risk. But once it starts to rain, you're a lot more free. Moving through January, that's when northern spotted owls can start to nest. And, you know, they're very cute. They're one of our favorite mascots, and we love to support them. So just something to think about. There it is, the charismatic megafauna that we love so much. When you're taking care of the land, you're taking care of things like the California quail here. And every time I see those chicks, yeah, beautiful. So really quick wrap up before we step into Q&A. What are some tips to care for the land and biodiversity in the defensible space? Try to choose native species. This is the space where we control a lot more what the landscape looks like by adding things, versus once you get outside the defensible space, a lot of times you're removing things, but you're trying to be conscientious about how you remove things. So here, when we're planting native species, we recommend 70 to 80%. But ideally, you know, 100% would be great. Check out Calscape. If you're unsure which plants you want to plant, they have a lot of options. They'll talk to you about the benefits of different plants. And you can also look at our website. You can plant islands. That's just saying you put kind of clumps of of different vegetation together and you surround them by a non-burnable surface, whether that's gravel, pavers, things like that, to disrupt the continuous aspects of the fuel or fuel continuity. They also will offer a lot of food and shelter. Can use integrated pest management, which we'll drop a little link about what that is. But basically, it's just thinking about all the moving parts as you're caring for the land. And of course, we recommend provide a water source. That's going to keep the plants healthy. It's also going to keep them hydrated. And if a fire does come through, it puts you at far less risk. All right, so we see these beautiful landscapes on the left. Maybe some of you have been out hiking. We have a nice grassland, some nice native perennial flowers, and then an oak woodland in the background. And then on the bottom, we have an oak woodland that, you know, is offering a lot. There's native grasses on the ground, looks very healthy. What can we do to support that? Retain your mature trees, number one, 100%. If the tree is very large, as much as we can, we don't want to cut it. That goes same for shrubs, that goes for grasses. Things that have been around offer more, they hold more carbon, they cleanse and filter through more water and air, and they're more likely to be habitat. Same thing as before, promoting native species. Here we don't remove, here we remove things more. So remove fewer native species and make sure you're managing the invasives. Any of the habitat features we talked about before, that's what we're here for. Avoid those bare soils, keep leaf litter intact, holds water, holds habitat and opportunities for all the little critters. And again, use integrated pest management or IPM. All right, I'll give the translators just a second to catch up, but thank you for coming. Now's the part that I love, some questions and answers. Please go forth, use the websites that we offered, whatever information, reach out to us, and yeah, spend the time, enhance that biodiversity. Great.
Okay, I think I'm meant to handle the Q&A. As we begin to do that, I just want to remind folks that this is part one of a 4-part series. This is meant to be the ecological part of it. And then on October 8th, a week from today, you're going to be able to join us for the one we call Defensible Space Zones and Code Requirements. You know, I saw a couple questions in the Q&A that will probably be better suited to address in part 2, but we'll take a crack at them anyway. All of these. And then on October 15th, we'll do part 3, Firewise Design within the Defensible Space Zone. And then the last one in the 4-part series, part 4, will be on October 22nd and is called Maintenance in the Defensible Space Zone. So once you have all this wonderful knowledge about how to put stuff in and what to put and where, you want to be able to maintain it well over time. And so that's meant to help you with that one. And then before I jump into the Q&A, I just want to remind everybody that this series of presentations has been funded through Sonoma County's Ag and Open Space Vegetation Management Grants Program. So a big shout out to County Ag and Open Space for their help there. So Eric, do you want to stop screen share and open it up to the panel, and I'll start rolling out these questions. Some of these are really quite good. So let me put them right here in front of me. So we have some that have been answered. I'll hit the unanswered ones first. And then time permitting, we'll dive into the answered ones. So a question from Ross, looking for options to reduce new grass growth near in the 5-foot zone and reduce yearly maintenance. Let me kind of take a shot at that real quick and remind folks that most of this information is meant for homes in the very high fire severity zones. Regardless of that, it's still good practice, I think, regardless of where you live, whether you live in a high or very high fire severity zone or moderate fire severity zone or whatever. I feel like all of this information is good practice. But with that said, who wants to take a crack at the grass in the 5-foot zone?
April, do you want to talk about your practices since you have the most installation experience?
Absolutely. So I kept answering these questions, like, come to our third week, that we have, 4 weeks of workshops. So reducing new grass growth near the 5-foot zone. Typically you want to have some kind of base rock or something that keeps out the weed plants, and then some kind of gravel or pretty rock or all kinds of things that you can do in that 0 to 5 zone. But you just want anything, well, you want any kind of plant material or ignitable materials out of that zone, including mulch. You can have some kind of grasses. So I don't want to distract from Eric's message of the sustainability content. And so if you come to week 3, you'll get tons of ideas for that zone. And also our Resilient Landscapes Coalition.org website has a ton of ideas and photos for that situation.
Yeah, so I'm going to add on to that a little bit, April, and
Thank
say that-
you.
Yeah, so when we get in the code section, you'll discover that technically you're not allowed to have any combustible material in
Absolutely.
the which includes grass, wet or dry, well irrigated or not. Now, with that said, again, if you don't live in the high or very high fire severity zone where that code is a requirement, it's still not a bad idea to use, fire-wise plants in that space anyway, well irrigated grass or, plants that you can keep well irrigated, natives, etc. So I just wanted to toss that out there too.
Thanks, Roberta.
Roberta, can I tie in a little bit to a question that Dave Sandine had put in it? I think it's Dave Sandine or someone named Dave, about that I think brings up a really great point that you were just referencing, Roberta, which Dave was asking about. Can you take into account building construction? Our home has 4-hour fire-weighted exterior walls. The requirements shouldn't be the same as for an older home with plywood walls. Please comment. And it's important for each of us to consider, to make our own risk assessment. And Dave, part of your risk assessment is recognizing that you're ahead of the game from a home hardening perspective, and you are in a much different position perhaps than someone with an older home with plywood walls. But you also would need to consider what's the severity, of the fire zone that you're in. For example, I live in a very high fire severity zone adjacent to the wildland urban interface. So certainly I'm taking a different perspective about my risk than someone might in a more dense urban environment in a lower fire severity zone. So it's really a balancing act of considering your situation and then how you choose to be best prepared, and including considerations for your neighbors, right, who you may be putting at risk if you don't take those actions to be better prepared for future fires. So I feel like that kind of had context in a lot of what Roberta was referring to, and also spoke to the question that David put in.
Yeah, regardless of any of this, code requirements or not, it's about reducing your risk. And I was kind of looking forward to that, responding to that inquiry, because don't forget Ember. So I'm not sure, I'm putting on my fire marshal hat here. And a true 4-hour wall usually means no openings, or if you have openings, they're limited in area and they're what's called protected openings. So if you have a house like that, you probably are living in a bunker. But I'm guessing the 4-hour wall may be a bit of an exaggeration because you probably have bedroom windows, etc. So regardless of how well the wall's constructed, even if it's a concrete block wall, if you have openings in it, you have to protect those openings from embers, whether they're ventilation openings in crawl spaces, attic spaces, or what have you, or if you leave the window open, you know, as you're evacuating during a serious wildfire. So keep that in mind as well. Anybody else want to chime in?
I
on-
just love this last question. We have an oak tree growing within the 5-foot area. Should we remove it?
So that's definitely something we'll dive into more in the presentation next Tuesday, which I'm giving on the defensible space zones. Certainly, as Eric referenced, our trees provide really important ecosystem services. I think there was a question from our participant earlier who's maybe coming back for the plant one, who was particularly interested in, you know, how do I place trees for shade? Trees provide really incredible ecosystem services, not only for our homes and energy conservation. On a hot day like today, an appropriately placed tree can really help provide shade, but also from a biodiversity perspective. Oaks are what are called keystone species because they support so many different insect and animal species in our natural environment. So there's a lot of considerations. If you have a tree within your 5-foot zone, and we will dive into those next week, but it's really about, yes, you can keep it, but you really have to be vigilant about your maintenance. So I have an oak tree that unfortunately had to come down because it was rotten, but it was in my 5 to 30-foot zone, but it dropped leaf litter constantly. So that meant during fire season, because I'm in a very high fire severity zone, I was vigilant about removing that leaf litter from my 0 to 5-foot zone. And you also need to consider leaf litter that it might drop on your roof or in your gutters, and being really vigilant about the maintenance of that as well. There's other considerations like limbing it up and making sure it's well pruned and maintained. So lots of considerations, but we don't say straight out you have to remove all the trees. But again, you have to assess your risk. And are you willing to do the maintenance that's going to be required to keep the tree in that proximity to the house? And then there's also considerations about keeping it above the roof by approximately 5 feet and away from any stovepipe or chimney outlets. And I don't know if Roberta, you would add anything from a fire professional lens to that as well.
No, that's all well said, Mimi. However, let's take and segue from that into Barbara's question. Haven't oaks been found to suppress fire? Which I think is a colossal myth if anybody looks at a fire ravaged area where oaks used to be. Oaks don't, quote, suppress fire. But if somebody wants to talk about, again, or talk a little more about the benefits of oaks, I have an oak right outside my front window. And I'm telling you, it's not going to go away. I'm keeping it there. I'll just maintain my defensible space around it as if it was part of my house.
Oh,
And
that's
then
a great
Roberta-
perspective.
Yeah, and could you also segue into Joanna's question, which speaks to struggling with conflicting insurance requirements, trying to keep beautiful old wooded spaces around our home, but canopy requirements seem to be the most difficult. But you know, expecting an agent inspection, can you speak to the complexities of that? I think that's a really critical question.
Yeah, so the insurance companies, from my experience in the folks we've worked with and heard from, they're using what's called the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home Standard. And if somebody can grab that and drop it in the chat, that would be helpful. And basically it says nothing in the 0 to 5, including overhanging trees. And so the struggle I think we all have is, regardless of what the code says or what the code allows, your insurance carrier can be, and oftentimes is, more restrictive than even what California code says. And so if you want to keep insurance, you got to do what they say. And I'm telling you, my experience again is it's all over the map. We've had reports of people saying their insurance claims adjuster who came out and inspected or assessed their house told them to put a concrete block wall, along their property line, because there's a bit of a upslope and they didn't want the fire coming upslope to get into their house. Just some crazy stuff, and the stuff is inconsistent. You'll get one person coming out doing an insurance assessment saying one thing, and another insurance company's assessor and your neighbor next door coming out telling them something completely different. It's all over the map. So the insurance thing is a huge moving target right now. It's all over the map. But at the end of the day, to get to the point, the IBHS standard says no canopy even over that 5-foot area, if you're looking at that. So Eric was meant to handle that one, it looked like. So let me jump back to, anybody else want to pigtail on that, or piggyback on that, I should say. Okay, let me go to Bonnie's question. Their landscape has been ravaged by the 2020 Walbridge fire. So they're interested in starting wisely on their new little stucco studio with a large wooden deck. And they would like trees for shade, and are thinking of natives and lavender. Anybody want to take a crack at that? Definitely natives, I guess.
Well, I will say Bonnie's no longer on the Zoom. I think April replied to, I think, an earlier question suggesting that for really great plant recommendations, make sure you come to webinar number 3, which April's going to be doing for us, which is in 2 weeks.
2 and 3. 2 and 3, you're gonna get, like, this was the bigger picture, tending the wild, and we're gonna dive in deeper every week, and then the last one will be maintenance. So I think there's just so much. And then you can register for the next workshops in the chat.
Yep. And there was one question I actually wanted to answer that's associated with the sustainability and beyond defensible space, from Ross, I believe it was.
Yes.
Ross Fisher. Real quick
Can I
before we run.
interrupt for just a second? I have to leave, and it's been wonderful being here. But I want to make sure you don't miss Ken's question, which is understanding the need for defensible space. I also am concerned about the stability of the slope above my residence as larger fuels are removed, etc. And unfortunately, I have to go, but I think that all ties in.
That
Yeah.
must be an answered, Ben. I haven't.
And maybe we can hold some questions and make sure that we answer them at the next workshop too, since we're kind of reaching time right now. But Eric, please.
Yeah, I just hope, thank you, Ross. That's a wonderful question. When it comes to management of larger areas, especially if you have one specific species like foxtail, it's getting to know how that navigate, or how that species, its life cycle, basically. So when are these foxtails flowering or seeding, however you want to look at it? And I would recommend basically going in and mowing them before they have viable seeds, leaving opportunities for native grasses, or you can look into native grasses on Calscape. You have California fescues, you have purple needlegrass, other things like that, and getting them established will basically help keep all the invasives back a little bit.
And can you speak to the question about slope stability if you're working on defensible space creation?
Let me find that real quick.
It's in the answered questions. It's Ken Mullins. It's just if you scroll down about halfway down the answered questions. So
Yeah.
understanding the need for defensible space, I'm also concerned about the stability of the slope above my residence as larger fuels are removed or spaced.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to be aware of. My recommendation, and some of the other folks here can speak to it as well, is doing it in small chunks. So much like putting in the native grasses and mowing down the invasives, a little bit at a time, so you don't have bare soils, is really probably the best move, especially if you're worried about sedimentation or erosion, regardless of where you are. And you said something about, or it referenced large materials. I would generally try to find ways to retain large trees, shrubs, things like that, just manage them really well, especially if they're in that zone 1 or zone 2. And kind of build your landscape around them rather than feeling you have to remove them, like what we saw in the presentation when you have the moonscape.
Thank you guys all for
thanks
joining,
for
and
coming
thank
on.
you guys that have hung out a little bit longer than our expected time frame. And thank you again to our Spanish interpreters,
Yes.
Ardo and Julie, for your help. We could not have done this as well without you. And then, yeah, thank you, Resilient Landscape Coalition team. Good job. Can't wait to do the next one. And
Yeah.
so thank you, all of you, for the last time for attending, those that have attended.